Okay, right now we're gonna do the purchase agreement.
Oh.
Yeah. All right, so let's see, sure. Great. See if I can- Sure. So I'm gonna hand out. For people that are here, I'm gonna hand out an RPA and we're gonna go through them online.
It's already start going into my previous views.
So, I just printed out some purchase agreements for you guys. We're gonna go through it right now online. It's like we're writing an offer. Now, the first, so for everyone who's online, so we're gonna go to get our purchase agreements. We're gonna go to car.org. And I'm gonna sign in to CAR where our contracts are. So once you're logged into CAR, you go to transactions, transactions, transactions. So in the big circle, I'm gonna hit transactions. And I'm gonna go down here to transactions, zip form edition, access. It's gonna validate me and then I'm gonna go. That's gonna open up a window. Then I'm gonna have to press new, starting new transaction. So over here in the upper left-hand corner, I'm gonna click new. And I'm gonna name my transaction. So I'm gonna write an offer. So new purchase or offer, I'm gonna click that. If I know the property that I'm writing an offer on, I'm just gonna. I can do an MLS connect here and pull in the MLS number from the MLS. But right now I'm just gonna make up an address. So it'll be 123 Main Street. It's a residential property active, and I'm just gonna press save. So that is just telling me it's just naming a transaction folder file called 123 Main Street. Now I need to add a document to that folder. So I'm gonna press add doc. And then I'm going to add a form. That's gonna be the residential purchase agreement. So over here on the right, first one is the California Residential Purchase Agreement. I'm gonna click that and that has been added to my file here. So I'm gonna click on it directly and I can go in and edit it. All right, so we're writing an offer, right? We have, we're gonna go on the MLS, we have the property address, we're reading the property description, we're reading the agent remarks. You know, what's important when you're writing an offer? So I would say in order to write an offer, you need to have the buyer's name. Right? Because you have elements of a contract, you have to have parties. You have to know who your buyers are. Is it gonna be two people? It's gonna be one person named on the offer, and then the seller. So I don't like to leave the seller's name blank on my offer. Again, elements of a contract, you need parties. So I might go to Clearmark Title and pull a grant deed to see who the title is under. It's really important, I think, to look at the grant deed. Because if the property is in a trust, you need to know who the trustees are. Right? If it's an LLC, I'm gonna look up LLC. I'm gonna do a search for the Secretary of State website to see who is the. Now, I can just call the listing agent and say who should I put down as the seller? I hope the response is not leave it blank. I'll fill it in, but I hope not. I want to put names down. Okay. Now, there's a bunch of forms that get bundled into the purchase agreement. So, I just handed out a purchase agreement starting with page 1 of the purchase agreement, but when you clicked on California Residential Purchase Agreement, you got a bunch of forms bundled. Does anyone not have them? You have one? Does everyone have one?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so the first form. Need a pen? Have a pen.
Yes.
The first form that gets bundled is the agency. So what is agency? It's a required form for any time that you are going to represent a client. So if you're representing a buyer, the buyer is going to sign this with the offer. If you're filling out a buyer representation agreement, it's going to be part of the buyer representation agreement. If you're getting a single party agreement signed from a seller, a single party agreement is different than a listing agreement. A single party agreement obligates a seller to pay a commission if a single party buys the property. It's not a listing where anyone that buys the property you get paid. Single party only obligates the seller if one specific person buys the property. That's called a single party agreement. But again, the seller will have to sign an agency. So these are all situations where you are going to have a client. Now, if you're ever doing paperwork for someone and they are not represented, and they don't want, you're not their agent. Right? Let's say there's a situation where you are representing a buyer and the seller is representing themselves. And they don't want you to be their agent. They're perfectly fine doing it themselves. Let's say you're dealing with a seller who used to have their real estate license. And they are not saying that their license expired, but they know how to do the paperwork and they don't need you to represent them. That's a good situation, right? Just saying, it's a situation where you're representing a buyer and the seller is representing themselves, right? In that situation, you're going to have the seller sign a non-agency agreement. So this is an agency agreement. There's also something called a non-agency agreement. There will be times where you're going to have someone sign a non-agency because you don't want the liability, right? Okay, so this is part of the regular purchase agreement. So what is an agency agreement? It says that there are agents that represent sellers. There's agents that represent buyers. And there are times where an agent is representing both a buyer and a seller. In this instance, we're talking about the broker. Okay, so of course, our broker represents sellers and buyers, and this is a dual agency, agent representing both seller and buyer. We do that all the time. I mean, obviously, our office does both. The next form is going to talk about different situations, but what are the responsibilities? So you have to have honest and fair dealing, and you have to disclose everything to a buyer. Okay, so right now we're writing an offer and the buyer is signing an agency agreement. What is our obligation to our buyer? Our obligation to our buyer is fair and honest dealing and full disclosure. Perfect. Thank you, Richard. Full disclosure. All right, so the buyer, you're going to check this box. You're going to enter your buyer's name. Buyer 1. And you're going to have Keller Williams is the brokerage. So it says here, real estate broker firm. And salesperson, your name will go here. So DRE license number for our office is 014287775. And then you'll put your own DRE number in. That'll be yours. Okay. Buyer's name. If you have two buyers, you'll check this second buyer box. All right, so far so good. Your name and our broker and our license numbers. Okay, keep going. No, I haven't included these additionals. So, because these are just boilerplate. We have agency, we filled in our name, our buyer's name and our name. The second page here is the civil code. The civil code says that we need to give this to our clients first and what needs to be on that page. So that's all. It just says that this is what the page needs to look like. Okay, fair housing. We can't discriminate. So there's no discrimination. except for money. Either if the buyer that we're representing has to have the money to buy the property. If they don't have the money, we don't have to represent them. But if they do have the money and we're engaged, we obviously want to get paid. So, I mean, this is here just to say there's no discrimination allowed in real estate. For sure. So that's all. We're just looking at money. Okay, the buyer's name goes here. The seller's name will, if you enter the seller's name here, it will appear everywhere from now on as the seller. So I'm gonna put here seller one. And you'll see that will populate in the future. So I'm going to title, I'm gonna look at the grant deed and see who is actually on title as the seller, and I'll put their name there. Okay. Here's another form called possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. It's a disclosure and a consent. So what is this form saying? That a broker can have multiple buyers and represent multiple sellers, and there's a possibility of dual agency. So if the seller is represented by broker, the seller acknowledges that broker may represent prospective buyers. So when you have a listing, a buyer may walk into your listing and ask you to write an offer for them, right? That will be dual agency. If you have a listing and another agent in this office brings an offer to you, that's dual agency, if it's an accepted offer. So this is just saying these are things that can happen. And then the last one here is offers are not necessarily confidential. So just know that your offer can be discussed. The listing agent can discuss your offer with other buyers and agents. So keep that in mind, that, what sometimes happens is your offer will get shopped. You have to think about this. If you give an offer to an agent and another agent calls that listing agent and says, do you have any offers? That listing agent could say yes, and they could say it's from so-and-so and it's for this much money. They can discuss anything that they want about it. So offers are not confidential. If you have a client that wants confidentiality, right? You're representing a high profile client, they want confidentiality. If that's the case, you need to find a form called confidentiality and have that signed first by the buyers, by the listing agent and their seller, right? I mean, a lot of people are gonna have to sign this if you want confidentiality. It's really hard to have confidentiality because don't forget, you have a title company, you have an escrow company, you have a lender. There's so many places that this can leak who the buyer is, right? So a lot of people have to sign confidentiality even prior to you making an offer. Before I make my offer, I need to have the listing agent sign it. I need the sellers to sign it. I need the broker to sign it on the listing side. Then I need my broker to sign it too. Then we have confidentiality, right? Then I can submit my offer. If I submit my offer with the confidentiality form, no one's agreed to it yet. They could talk about it. Okay, so this is just here so we don't get sued. Okay, I mean, it's right. It's just saying it's not confidential. All right, so we got seller one, buyer one is there. The seller's brokerage firm will appear here if you did an MLS Connect. When we started this, there was a place to put in the MLS number that will bring in the listing agent's information. Or you can just enter it manually. From the MLS, you can look who the listing broker is and who the agent is and enter it. No problem. Wire fraud and electronic funds transfer advisory. This is here because wire fraud is real. And we need to tell our buyer, before you send your money, call escrow and verify the account number and the routing number, the ABA number. Escrow, this is real. Just make sure that's done. I just want to say, I know someone in this office, their parents lost $500,000 wiring to a fraudulent bank account. Yeah. This is real. So what happens is there are hackers that will hack into escrow's email. They'll have the username and password to an escrow's email account, and they're just monitoring email that the escrow is sending back and forth. And then an email will come into escrow and it'll say, congratulations, we have a deal. And then the hacker will respond to the buyer's agent, congratulations, here are the wire instructions for your buyer. And then the buyer everyone thinks they're talking to escrow, will send their money. So the buyer needs to, once they receive the wire instructions, they need to call escrow and confirm the number over the phone. And I would say even go one step further than that. You give the phone number to escrow to your client and give them the phone number, text it to them, have a record that you're sending the phone number that they need to call. So that would be my advice. Okay. Keep going. Buyer's homeowner insurance advisory. This is a huge deal right now in California. It's very hard to get insurance in California right now. A lot of insurance carriers have pulled out. In the mountains where it's a fire hazard, there's not a lot of insurance companies that are writing. There's a renters company called Lemonade. They do renters policies. Even them, I tried to look for a renter's policy for a tenant that's going to move into the Beverly Hills Post Office, and they said, no, we don't write here. So this is something that needs to happen right away. When you're representing a buyer, make sure that they're contacting their insurance company right away to get a quote for the insurance. It might turn out that their insurance company says we're not doing that and they need to call someone else. So I do have referrals I can make for insurance. But it's important they do it right away. No surprises. Okay, now we're gonna get into the actual purchase contract. All right, so this is what I handed out. So take notes on it. Okay, date prepared. This date prepared is super important. This does not have to be the date that everything gets signed. Date prepared is today. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put my cursor right on date prepared and I'm gonna click it. It's gonna put today's date in. That's gonna be the date prepared. Whenever in the future we're doing a document, like let's say we're doing a contingency removal, right? It's gonna say at the very top of that document, according to the residential purchase agreement dated, it's gonna ask you for the date. What purchase agreement are we referring to? It's referring to the one dated with this date right here, date prepared. Okay. All right, this is an offer from buyer one. We're gonna have the property to be acquired. So there's gonna be an address here. So 123 Listing Street. Okay. You're gonna put the city in Beverly Hills. And in the county of Los Angeles. California, zip code 90210. Assessor parcel number. So you're usually gonna get this number. It's gonna be on the MLS, but also you can confirm it once you're logged into escrow. It's gonna be public records. It's gonna be on the MLS. It's gonna be title company. You can get the title when you pull the grantee. It'll be there. So you'll put the parcel number there. Okay. Now, who is the seller's brokerage firm? So let's just say it's Keller Williams Beverly Hills and me too. I'm double ending this deal. So if I am writing a offer from a buyer on my own listing, I'm going to check this box that I represent both the buyer and the seller. Usually you're not going to be writing an offer, right? You're going to be writing an offer on someone else's listing. So their company name will go here and their company's license number, their name, their license number. So that'll be the seller. And then you'll be checking these boxes that you're representing the buyer. Okay. In some rare instances, there will be more than one broker representing the buyer or seller. That's really rare. But it happens. Like, you might have some $30 million listing that you're writing an offer on, and there's two different brokerages that are the listing agents, or three different, right? So in that event, you'll check one of these boxes, it'll pull up an additional form. All right. We'll keep going. All right, purchase price. How much are we offering? So remember before, these are the things that you need to know before you're writing the offer. So what do you need to know? You need to know the buyer's names, right? And then you need to know more information from the lender. This is really important. So whenever you're talking to a buyer, the question is, it could be all cash, but have you talked to your lender? Can I get your lender's contact information? The lender's usually sending you a pre-approval letter. When you get that pre-approval letter, call the lender up. And here's what we need to know from the lender. The purchase price, confirm it with the lender. How fast an escrow can you close? Can we do a 21-day escrow, 30-day escrow? Now, don't forget, we need to know from the seller, if someone's living in the property, they may not be able to do a 30-day, like, I don't know. We need to make sure with the seller, with the listing agent, how fast an escrow we can have. But sometimes you're making an offer on a vacant property, and it'll be very beneficial to you to have a fast escrow. The seller will love that. So this is usually gonna be 30 days. But you can also fill this out instead of like that. You can check this here, and instead of putting an actual date, you can actually type in here. Like you can delete that, press the space bar. It turns into something typable. And then you have your other terms on 3R. You can say like C3R. If you're gonna do it like that, you can go down here to 3R where it says other terms. And you can actually type in here, close of escrow to be 30 days. By mutual agreement. If you're competing with other, even if your lender's telling you they need 30 days, but you're competing with other offers, right? This is a great way to separate yourself from other buyers. Like how do you win? How do you win an offer? This is how. Tell them you're open to closing early if the lender can do it. All right. All right, so let's go back up. All right. Expiration of offer. This offer is automatically good for 3 days. Let's say you're writing an offer on a property and in the MLS it says offer deadline, right? Offer deadline next week, Wednesday. So if that's the case, you might need to extend the expiration of your offer, right? So now, if I'm writing an offer, today's Thursday, and I know that this property just came on the market and I want to get my offer accepted before they have their open house Sunday. Right? I don't want to wait for Sunday when I want to get my offer in and get it accepted. I don't want to wait for Sunday when all these buyers are going to be coming in the open house. And then all of a sudden I'm in competition. I might shorten my expiration of offer. Today's Thursday. I want to know by tomorrow at 5 p.m. Right? So I'm gonna change this to 5 p.m. tomorrow. Right? Tomorrow. Okay, I'm shortening it. I want to try to get my deal done before I get beaten out by other buyers. All right, initial deposit. This is usually going to be 3%. So let's just say we are offering $1 million on this property, which is pretty low nowadays. And our deposit is going to be 30,000, which is 3%. That deposit is due within 3 business days after acceptance. This is the only thing in the entire contract that's business days. Everything else is calendar. All right. So your buyer needs to be prepared that if they have an offer that gets accepted, they have 3 business days to get their money in. So today's Thursday. If we have an accepted offer today, when is the deposit due? Today's Thursday.
It's sad.
Tuesday.
Monday?
Tuesday. So if it's accepted today, you have Friday, Monday, Tuesday. So the money needs to get in Tuesday. And if you look here, it's by default, it says within 3 business days by wire transfer. Okay, so by default, it's going to be a wire. If the money is due on Tuesday by wire, your client needs to know that there are wire cutoff times at the bank. They need to get to the bank before 1 p.m. That's usually the cutoff time. Different banks have different cutoff times. It's usually 1 p.m. They better get to the bank by 11 or 12 to make sure that that happens. Okay. All right, increased deposit. We're not going to worry about that right now. Sometimes if you want to really sweeten your offer, you can say that the buyer will put additional money, at contingency removal. All right, you can do that. Okay, loan amount. This is something we need to know from the lender. So what were the original questions we need to know from the lender? We need to know how fast can you close escrow? Can you do a 30-day escrow? We need to confirm the loan amount. So in this case, it's going to be 800,000 on a $1 million purchase. We need to know the rate. So what rate are you charging the buyer? So let's say right now it's going to be 7.25. and how many points are they gonna pay on the purchase? So this is information you're gonna get from the lender. So you're gonna ask the lender, how fast can you close? What's the interest rate and how many points? The other information that the lender is that you need to know from the lender is how long do you need for full loan approval? And how long do you need for the appraisal? Once you have all that information, that's good. You have everything you need to write the offer. So you go over the price, you're gonna go over the loan amount, the interest rate and the points. And then how long do you need for loan approval and appraisal? That will appear here on the next page. Right here, it says loan and appraisal, 17 days. 17 days is the default. I would like to shorten these if I can, because I want my offer to stand out. If I'm writing an offer on a property that's been on the market a long time and there's no competition, I really don't care to shorten these. Like, that's not, it's not benefiting me to shorten them. But if I'm going up against other buyers, I really do want to shorten these to compete. Okay, let's keep going. So we got the loan amount, we got the rate, we got the points, all good. There is a box here that it says occupancy type primary. By default, this is their primary residence, or if checked, secondary or investment. My advice to you is never check these boxes. Never, ever, 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 never, ever. I generally don't use the word never or always, but here I'm saying never. Never check these boxes. If you check this box, you will automatically cause your client to pay a higher interest rate. Okay? We are not in charge of our clients. Our clients can absolutely be intending on occupying this property as their primary residence. And if they choose not to, that's up to them. But me as an agent, if I check one of these boxes, I might get a nasty call from my buyer, right? When the lender receives this, and all of a sudden they're being quoted a higher rate because this is not their primary residence, right? That's not up to me to make that decision. So I'm not touching it. All right, this will automatically get filled in, the balance of the down payment purchase price. All right, I just want to make a distinction here. What's the difference between a deposit and a down payment?
First, the initial money you put into escrow before. Down payment, the balance you're gonna have before closing, 3 days before closing.
Okay, so if this is a 20% down payment, the entire down payment is 20%. 3% will be the deposit, and then they have a 17% balance. The entire down payment is 20%. 3% was their deposit, 17% is the remainder of the down payment. So the 3% is part of their down payment, 17% remainder is down payment.
But
That's the difference.
excuse me, when the removal contingency, they can get the 3%. What about the down payment?
No, so we have something called liquidated damages, which we'll talk about. So how much can the buyer keep if the buyer doesn't perform, right? After they remove their contingency. So yes, so the buyer can only keep their actual deposit, right? Anything above this amount is not considered a deposit unless you filled out this second paragraph. Anything that is above this number is not considered a deposit. If it's their primary residence, the maximum that can be kept is the actual deposit, not to exceed 3%. So even if more money was put into escrow, they can't get more than 3%. Okay, so that's for a person buying a property. And we'll look at that further in liquidated damage. All right, seller credit. There are some times where you're going to be representing a buyer where we're going to be asking for a seller credit up front. I've done some offers where the lender has said, this is how I want the offer structured. We're gonna offer $1 million, but the buyer is we're gonna be asking the seller to credit back 20,000. Okay, so the offer is really not $1 million, it's 980, right? We're offering $1 million, but we're asking for a $20,000 credit up front. There are some lenders that want to structure the deal like this. That's just how they got their buyer approved, right? So when you email the offer to the listing agent, tell them, I'm writing the offer for $1 million with a $20,000 credit, so the offer is really 980. Just tell them upfront, this is how the lender wanted me to structure the offer. Okay. Now, there's another checkbox here. This is a newer checkbox on our purchase agreements. It says seller agrees to pay the obligation of the buyer to compensate buyer's broker under a separate agreement. This box is gonna be always checked from now on. It's starting mid-August, we're talking about buyer broker agreements. Well, every time that we show a property, we're gonna have a buyer representation agreement signed to show our buyers. We're gonna be using this checkbox, I think, always, and that's, okay, so what happens when we check this box? Look what happened, it added a form to our contract. So let's just take a look at that form real quick that it just added. Seller payment to buyer's broker. Okay, so use this form when you've already entered into a buyer representation agreement. Okay, so this agreement right now is saying that the buyer representation agreement was signed by my buyer telling me that he's gonna pay me 2.5% of the purchase price. This form is going to change in August, but right now, let's say you have a buyer rep agreement and it's signed for 2.5%. Okay? And you're writing an offer on a property that's in the MLS advertising 2%. Okay, your buyer signed 2.5, and the MLS is advertising 2. The way that this gets filled out is you have a buyer rep agreement for 2.5. The compensation from the seller's broker in the MLS was 2%. And you are asking that the seller agree to pay the buyer's broker an extra 0.5%. So that's how this is filled out right now. If your buyer signed for 2.5, the seller advertises 2, you're asking for the seller to pay that extra 0.5. Any questions about this? Okay, if your buyer signed 2.5 and the MLS is advertising 2.5, you don't need this. You only need this when there's a discrepancy.
And
Yeah.
this is for, sorry, this is for the time that we are buyer agent. Means we
When-
have,
When your buyer signed a buyer rep agreement with you, and then
Yeah.
and that the MLS is advertising less than they signed.
okay,
there's-
and then,
There's 3 paragraphs. How much they signed for, how much is being offered by the MLS, and then you're asking for the difference.
okay, thank you.
Right, so that's it. So how much you signed, how much the buyer signed with you on their agreement, what's being advertised in the MLS, and the difference. We're asking for the difference. All right?
This would, if you have to do this, would you just attach this with the offer?
Yes, you will be, this will automatically get attached with your offer, asking for that extra 0.5. And you're not attaching your actual buyer rep agreement.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're only attaching this form that says that you have one.
That's new, JJ,
Yeah,
because before you are not entitled to ask for more commission, right?
Yeah, this is new. It allows us to ask for more commission because before we couldn't do that.
It's illegal, right?
So, right, exactly. So it's an ethics violation for us to make our offer dependent on the seller paying a higher commission. So previously, don't forget, the seller has a signed listing with the listing agent, with listing broker. That's a listing agreement. If we were making our offer conditional upon the seller paying us more money, now there's a whole problem because we can't deal directly with the seller. The listing broker deals directly with the seller. So CAR, the NAR, they said you can't do that. You cannot make your offer conditional upon more money. The way that they got around it is that this has nothing to do with the listing broker or their listing agreement. We're asking the seller directly now in our offers to pay the obligation of the buyer. The difference is they can say no. All right, the seller can say no. So hopefully they don't. But we're gonna check this box. Seller agrees to pay the obligation of the buyer to compensate the buyer's broker under a separate agreement. And then it's going to attach that form. Seller's broker's offer, if any, to compensate buyer's broker is unaffected unless otherwise agreed. The seller's broker's offer to compensate the buyer's broker is unaffected. That's saying that the listing broker is advertising too, right? that is unaffected. So they still have to pay the 2. Right? We're not changing the listing agreement. We can't change the listing agreement. We only represent our buyers. Clear?
Got it.
Okay. All right, verification of all cash. Sufficient funds, so attached to the offer. So automatically, if you don't touch anything, this is saying that if you're making an all cash offer, like up here where you wrote your offer, you could check this all cash box. If you checked that all cash box, by default, you're sending proof of funds for the entire purchase amount. Also, if you're getting a loan, the next paragraph says attached to the offer is the verification of down payment. So you need to send proof of funds with your offer. You're asking your buyer to give you a bank statement, something of any kind of statement that has their name, it's current, and shows a balance. And that balance needs to be a little bit bigger than the down payment or purchase price, right? If they're all cash. So there are closing costs, don't forget. Like we have in this example, our buyer is putting 200,000 down. They will need to show like 210. There's gonna be a little extra money for closing costs, right? So they need to show a little more. Verification of a loan application. So hopefully we're attaching by default, it says attached to the offer is a lender approval. So is it a pre-qualification? Is it a pre-approval or a fully underwritten pre-approval? What are the differences between those? A pre-qualification is just a phone call to a lender, and the lender says, based upon my conversation with the buyer, they're approved. That's pre-qualification. Pre-approval means the lender received the tax returns, received their W-2s, right, and ran their credit. Based upon everything they've received, they're approved. Pre-approval is going to come from banks. Banks usually don't spit out pre-approvals without getting all the information first from their clients. A fully underwritten pre-approval, that's the best that you can get. That means that everything was not only received by the lender, but it went to underwriting and underwriting reviewed it. This is going to be a direct lender. So Chase, Wells Fargo, Citibank, even Rocket Mortgage here in our office is a direct lender. They have their own money that they lend out. So they can give you this fully underwritten pre-approval. And basically the pre-approval letter that you get says this buyer is fully approved to buy this property. The loan will be conditional upon the property itself and appraisal. So the buyer's approved, only the excuse me, it's the client, just gonna text him. So the seller have an escrow right now. All right. So by default, proof of funds, you're going to attach. Pre-approval, you're going to attach. Okay. Final verification of condition. Just know your buyer has a right before closing, 5 days before closing, to go visit the property. So why is the buyer going to visit the property? They want to make sure that the property is in the same condition as when you went into escrow, and to make sure that the seller made repairs that were requested. Okay, so the buyer is now all of a sudden gonna put all their money into escrow, the lender's gonna put their money into escrow. The buyer now has a chance just to go visit the property one last time within the last 5 days and verify the condition. Is it in the same condition as when we went into escrow? Have repairs been made? Okay, this is a big one now. It's called the assignment request. The buyer has the right to assign this contract within 17 days from acceptance. What we're seeing right now in the market are a lot of flippers. And when I say flipper, I'm not talking about buying, fixing, and reselling. I'm talking about contract flippers. Okay, there's a lot of people right now that are putting properties under contract, and then they have their own open houses. Okay, and they bring all different, yeah, crazy, right? Right?
I understand.
Okay, here we go. Let's talk about it for a second. There are buyers in the market right now who will send you an offer on your property. And this will be very clear that they have the right to assign the contract. And then once they're under contract from you, they are going to say, can I get into the property between such and such time? And then they're gonna have people come in. Who are these people coming in? Buyers in their own database that they're gonna try to assign the contract to
More money.
for more money.
Even though
then-
you haven't sold the property to.
I sold the property to them, they're the buyer,
Oh,
but they still have the right to back out,
okay.
right? Now, during their period, their investigation period, they're trying to sell the contract for more money. Right? So I put the property on for I put the property on the market for 1.2. Right? I put the property on the market for 1.2. Someone comes in, they write it out a full price offer, 1.2. All of a sudden, there's people coming and I don't know who they are. And then all of a sudden, I get a form in my email and it says request for assignment. And the buyer is trying to assign the contract to a new buyer. And they're making $100,000.
They have to disclose.
They have to disclose what they're making. Yes. So this is happening all the time right now.
How are they making that?
Yes.
So seller can refuse or now it's either.
So the seller has to agree if it's reasonable. The seller has to agree if it's reasonable.
Oh, okay.
How are they making that $100,000?
They're selling the contract,
Oh, just for,
assigning the contract, just on the assignment. They're making the money.
We put at your value a little bit. It was a good buy and.
Right. The listing agent put the property on the market for too low.
Yeah.
Right? Someone came in, wrote an offer, and they are making money on flipping their contract.
So if it was a multiple offer situation, could the first person sell it to
Yeah.
the third?
Sure.
Oh my,
Yes.
More money.
Assignment. So here, I'm just gonna go real quick and I'm gonna add a form here.
But JJ, I have a question. Then what will be happen because the first one, for example, put the deposit money already because he had just 3 days to put that money. He put already the money
Buyer puts money up.
and the paperwork is gone through his name and the loan and everything. Now the second buyer is coming, then he's going to he's going to put the money on the escrow. That money is coming
So
back.
let's
or
look
how
at
that
the
will work?
let's look at this, let's look at the form that's gonna come to you. Assignment of agreement. Okay, here it says partial or total assignment. Let's say total assignment. The new buyer replaces all original buyers. Buyer is assigning all of buyer's interest in the agreement to the assignee named below. Assignee name, buyer number 3. Okay. Here we go. Assignee, buyer, okay, consideration for assignment. Buyer has received or will receive consideration from assignee in the amount of 100,000. Okay. Guess what? Now you have to present this to your seller. Your seller now has to sign this, and your seller is gonna say, wow, I undersold my property.
Yeah.
I'm getting cheated out of 100,000 that could have been mine. Okay, now, I want you guys to just know about this because I want your antenna to be up and be aware of what's going on. This is very, very, very common right now. It started out not so common, now it's extremely common. So just be aware. I have a conversation now with my sellers that when offers are coming in on their property, and I'm looking at them, who are the offers coming from? Investors. Right? Such and such LLC. Conversation I'm having with my seller now is, I want you to be aware that these investors might try to resell the contract. Right? They might complete the sale themselves and fix it and sell it. They also might try to assign the contract. It's very common right now. It might happen. So don't be surprised if they try to find a different buyer for the property and try to make quick money. A lot of investors are doing that. I don't want you to be thrown off guard. Yes, it is a conversation that you're gonna have. Do you guys
JJ,
think? Yes.
this is Stephanie. I want to ask, so this assignment agreement may send to the seller after the inspection contingent, everything already removed.
So now, me, as a smart listing agent, I am going to remember that it has to be reasonable. right? So I'm gonna say that it's only reasonable if the buyer number one first removes their contingencies. If the buyer number one removes all of their contingencies, then they can assign it to buyer number, buyer number 2 or 3, right?
But it means the buyer can't back out.
Correct. Now, I'm gonna be even more clever than that, and I'm gonna say the seller will not release the initial deposit until after closing. So the new buyer is gonna have to make a deposit and put their money in, right? Buyer number 2 or 3 is gonna have to put their money in, but I don't want the money to go back to buyer number 1 until we close escrow. I want buyer number 1 also to be on the hook.
So escrow have two sets of deposit.
Yeah, because the seller, I don't want that money gone. Seller number 1 is making 100,000, so should have some skin in the game.
Why
Yeah,
you don't want to release the first buyer's initial deposit? What's the risk there?
I just want the buyer number 1 who's making 100,000 on my seller to have some risk. I
Yeah.
want to make sure that deal happens. And if buyer number 2 or 3 can't complete the deal, buyer number 1 needs to complete the deal because they remove contingencies first. Right?
So when the
I want
buyer,
everyone on the, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I'm just saying, be aware that this could happen. That's what I'm saying. Now, the other part of this form for assignment is if the buyer themselves are going to be assigning, there's a checkbox here for assignee is buyer's own trust or wholly owned entity. So if the buyer themselves is going to be buying this property in their own LLC or their own trust, this would be the proper form to use to do that. Assignee could be their own trust or their own LLC. That's totally fine. I have no problem with that. Right? That's reasonable. All right, let's keep going. Just want to move. Okay, but just know that exists in the contract, 17 days to assign. I have seen counter offers come back from listing agents saying, buyer has no right to assign this contract. They remove this. Okay. All right, contingencies. What is a contingency? A contingency is an excuse for the buyer to back out without leaving their deposit. That's what a contingency is. Contingency is an excuse for the buyer to back out without losing their deposit. Okay, so what are the contingencies? We have 3. We have a loan contingency, an appraisal contingency, and investigation of property. Now, the investigation covers a lot. Investigation is not just inspections. Investigation is also approval of all the reports and everything that has to do with property. That's investigation. So by default, these are all 17 days. We have 17 days to get full loan approval for the appraiser to come and get his report back out and investigate the property. Now let's talk real quick about appraisal. Sometimes you're going to have a buyer that you can have a buyer that's making an offer on a property that doesn't have any comps. Okay, there are areas that there are very infrequent sales, or they're making an offer on a condo in a building where nothing has sold in the past 10 years, right? It's common. Let's say your buyer is also putting down 50%, right? They're only getting a 50% loan. Your buyer could reduce the appraisal contingency. So let's say the property, you're making $1 million offer on a property and the comps only show 800,000, right? There's no comps to support $1 million. And the listing agent is saying, we would prefer if there was no appraisal contingency because we know there are no comps. So this is a way to protect your buyer. Your buyer is saying, okay, I'm putting 50% down. The lender just wants to make sure that they are covered, right? But because the buyer is putting so much money down, they're saying, you know what? If the property only appraises for 800,000, that's fine. Like, I'm not going to back out if the appraisal only comes in at 800, even though I'm making $1 million offer. So here you're going to put appraisal contingency based upon appraised value at a minimum of purchase price and you can put the lower number here. Okay. Does that make sense to everyone? Right. Because the listing agent sometimes knows that there's no comps. So you would put a lower number here. Now, sometimes you're gonna have an all cash offer, you can remove these contingencies, no loan, no appraisal. If you have a cash offer, there is no loan contingency. It's automatically removed. If you have a cash offer, you could still have an appraisal contingency. So just keep that in mind. As a listing agent, when I receive a cash offer, I want to see if this no appraisal box is marked or not. Because there could still be an appraisal contingency, which is a loophole that the buyer could get out of. Like they can hire an appraiser if they want out of the contract and get a low appraisal. So just something to keep in mind. If I'm writing a cash offer, I'm going to check both these boxes. No loan contingency, no appraisal contingency. And then don't forget, the lender's going to tell you how long they need for this. All right, investigation of property, 17 days. 17 days is a really long time to investigate. That's a long time. If I have an accepted offer today on a property, what are the inspections I need? I need a general inspection. If it's a house, sewer inspection, I do a chimney inspection, mold, geological inspection if it's on a hillside. I'm sure I can get all those inspections done. Today's Thursday. I'm sure I could get people there maybe tomorrow, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Like I get it all done in 7 days. I could. And now I want to give it a little time to get my reports back. So look, I'm totally comfortable reducing this to 10 days. Now, if I have a favorite inspector, I might call my inspector right now when I'm writing my offer and say, what does your schedule look like the next 10 days, right? So I might even have my inspector pencil me in just in case my offer gets accepted, right? Just to get this date. But I want to shorten this if I can to make my offer competitive with other buyers. So if the property's sitting on the market for a long time and I'm not up against anyone else, there's no reason to shorten it, right? But if I am up against other buyers, I will want to try to shorten these because I don't need that much time. You really don't. And if a situation comes up, you can always request an extension. The seller doesn't have to give it to you, but if it's a legitimate request, hopefully they will. Yeah.
Yeah, do you normally do mold for every house inspection?
I personally don't. I wait for the general inspector to tell me that there's
If any
moisture
mold.
issues, or that I should have a mold inspection. There are other agents who religiously always have a mold inspection.
Got it. And
So-
why do you normally do chimney inspection for a house?
I would recommend a buyer do a chimney. Yeah,
Why?
for a house or a condo, I would recommend it.
Why?
And the reason is, if there are issues, now's the time to get the seller to pay for it, to try to get the seller to pay.
But I
If
think
they, yeah,
fireplace and chimney, that always has issues like for a house. And a lot of buyers may not be able to use the real wood fireplace anymore, and they're not going to use that. So if you do inspection and this kind of function that are not necessary,
so if you have a house that has a wood burning chimney,
mhm,
that can be repaired to burn wood. If you're doing brand new construction, that will be a gas only. But if
Okay.
it's a repair, that can be wood burning.
Can't put in.
As far as I know. But if you're gonna tear it down completely and rebuild it, that they might insist on a wood on a gas only if it's a complete tear down. Maybe. I don't know. I just had someone do it in Beverly Hills. I'm gonna ask them.
There's limits to putting in wood burning
There's limits.
in the state. I don't know if you're even.
But if on a repair,
On a repair, I think you can keep it.
right, so
Like-
what if,
But there's limits. My parents have a wood burning. If they did too much work on it or they condense it too much, they have to take it out.
okay,
Put in gas, depending on how much they want to condense like the hearth.
Got
But you
it.
can repair it and keep it wood. But I also don't think you can put in,
brand new construction cannot be.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's weird restrictions on it.
So right now, I'm just saying like inspect it, always inspect, even brand new construction inspect. And the reason I'm saying that is the contractor hired a subcontractor to build a chimney. Subcontractor, basically the new chimney is just these metal stacks that connect into each other. They push them into each other, they lock in. The subcontractor may have just pushed too hard and that metal pipe separated and now there's an air gap where embers, things can ignite and fly out and cause everything to go up. So always inspect.
What are a bunch of places? I went to an open house and they said the fireplace was decorative. But
Decorative, yes.
the-
When an agent describes the fireplace as decorative, that means they know it doesn't work and the seller is not gonna pay any money to repair it.
so there's no point in even doing an inspection on that.
Yeah, you can still can, yeah, because
They could fix it in the
they
future.
could fix it. And the buyer wants to know how much it will cost to get it fixed. But usually that's agent speak or
It's broken.
the seller's not paying for it.
Or it's not even a fireplace.
Yeah, I mean, usually fireplace is decorative.
Usually not even a real fireplace there.
And that's
Like-
possible.
Crazy.
I've seen a lot of properties that have fireplace, what appears to be a fireplace, but it was really just a gas hookup or an external unit that actually goes in that area. They used to have these, like
Sure.
radiators, right? They have picture flames on the front and they're gas and they would hook up and sit in that area, but there is no flue. There's nothing for gas to escape. I guess there
They make those for apartments.
something, I don't know, if anything that's gas better have some kind of escape, right? So maybe there is a hole, I don't know. But my advice is always inspect a shipping. Even if you're in a condo, the reason is if there's an issue with the condo, now is the time to ask the HOA to make the repair. The HOA is gonna be very slow to repair anything if something's not in escrow. When they're in escrow, that's the time an HOA will move quickly and make decisions quickly. So that's my recommendation.
Hi,
So you're-
JJ, quick question.
Yeah.
This is Suki. Can you ask HOA to repair although you haven't closed on the property yet?
So technically, the seller is the one that needs to ask the HOA to make the repair. 'Cause they are the owner. So
Okay.
basically,
So we have,
the seller is going to the HOA and saying, hey, my buyer is not closing because this needs to get repaired and it's an HOA responsibility. Can you please expedite this repair? That's what the seller's,
okay. So we have to ask the listing agent to ask the seller.
correct.
To
The
ask
seller,
HOA.
the seller, exactly. The seller needs to get the HOA to get moving on it. Yes.
Okay.
Now,
thank you.
as a buyer's agent, I do sometimes email the HOA directly or the property manager directly and say, is this an HOA responsibility? Just to find out if they're gonna take responsibility for it. Again, everything is up to your buyer if they're gonna remove contingencies. The buyer has to be satisfied with removing their contingency that they're gonna be okay moving forward. So at this point, I'm saying to the buyer, the HOA says it's their responsibility, but they're not gonna fix it right away. Are you okay with that? Then it's up to the buyer. Do they want to move forward? All right, so the buyer has 17 days to review and approve the title report. They have 17 days to review and approve all of the HOA disclosures. When is the buyer going to take, oh, there's a checkbox here for sale of buyer's property. If you have a buyer that needs to sell their property, they need that money to buy what you're making an offer on, then you're gonna check this box. Sale of buyer's property is not a contingency unless checked here. So you're talking to a buyer, they own a property that they need to sell to use that money to make their purchase. That's when this box gets checked. Then we'll have to deal with that form. Now, there's gonna be issues with that. If I'm a listing agent and I receive an offer that's contingent upon that buyer selling their property, right? I want to know that property's address and I want to know how much they're going to list it for. I want to make sure that they're not in the clouds thinking some unrealistic price. So I might have a counter offer that says buyer agrees to list their property by such and such date at such and such price. That might be in my counter offer, right? Because I want to make sure they're not trying to get something unrealistic. Yeah, just put that out. All right, time of possession. The buyer is going to own the property upon notice of record. What is that? That means that there's a grantee that gets signed by the seller. It says, I, seller one, for valuable consideration, hereby grant my property to buyer one. That gets notarized and signed. That's the grantee. It's held by escrow. Escrow collects the money from the buyer. Once escrow has the money, they have a signed grantee. Then this grantee goes to title and title records it at the county. The act of having the grantee recorded at the county is the transfer of title. The buyer now owns that property. So if we're closing escrow today, that means that this grantee got recorded today. I can no longer go into that property as the listing agent. I will be trespassing. It's now the property of the buyer. So what I do as a listing agent is I'll have a lockbox, a combination lockbox on the property. And for a day of closing, when escrow calls me or title calls me and says, congratulations, I'll immediately call my client and say, congratulations. That's a call, not a text message. I'll call my client, congratulations. Thank you so much for your business. I really appreciate it. Great news. We just closed. Now I'll call the other agent and I'll say, there's a combination lockbox on the property for the key, and the rest of the keys are in the kitchen in a drawer. Congratulations. Thank you. So then that's it. I don't have to go back to the property. They can get the front door key in the lockbox and they can get the rest of the keys in the kitchen. All right. Time of possession upon note. Now, you will have a situation where the seller is going to remain in the property, right? The buyer is not taking possession at recording. Seller needs 2-3 days, or seller needs up to 30 days, maybe sometimes 60 days. Okay, here we go. What's going to happen now? Seller occupied, close of escrow date. So we need, let's say the seller wants to stay there for 7 days past close of escrow. The seller is now becoming a tenant. Now I want to use the definition, the word tenant loosely, because a tenant is someone who stays in a property 30 days or more. I would prefer not to give tenancy to the seller who's staying in the property. There's 2 different forms here. There's a form for a seller that's staying in the property 29 days or less, or a seller staying in the property 30 days or more. Someone who's staying in the property 29 days or less they have a license. They have a license to remain in possession. That's different than having a tenancy. Once they're in the property 30 days, they become a tenant. So we don't want that. So just know that there's 2 different things here. Anytime you're going to allow a seller to stay, there could be legal consequences to that. And these forms do say at the very top, if a buyer is considering letting a seller stay on the property, talk to your attorney. Right? So, because what if they don't move out? Right? I called the city of Beverly Hills a couple of months ago, and I said, would you kick out a seller who stayed in a property past their deadline? And the city of Beverly Hills said to me, no. Basically, they're not getting involved in it unless there's a court order for it, right? That's all enforce it. But they're not going to go in. I mean, maybe you can get them to go knock on the door for you and try, but they're not going to physically remove someone. Okay.
Quick question, JJ.
Yeah.
Would that also be considered a lease back, or would you implement that?
Yes, that's a lease back. Yes.
Got it. Okay.
So the way that I would protect my buyer is I would probably not release all the money to the seller. I'll have a nice chunk of money withheld in escrow, waiting for them to move out. Right? And in the lease back we're talking about, one of these documents, I will probably have a very large rent amount on there, which will take effect if they don't move out by a certain date. And that way I have something in writing with a very large lease amount that it won't make sense for them to stay. Right? That's how we can protect our buyer. Okay, occupied units by tenants or anyone other than the seller. If we don't touch anything with this offer, we are getting a vacant property. We don't touch anything. Okay, so just know that. It's only when you start marking these things up that you're gonna allow someone to be staying in the property. So if there's a tenant in the property, you're gonna check this box. That's gonna pull up a tenant occupied property addendum. On that form, you could actually say, let's take a look at it real quick, because sometimes do buy a property with a tenant in it. This form says, tenant to remain in possession if you don't touch it, or property to be delivered vacant. You can check this box and the seller is responsible for getting rid of the tenant. I would always recommend the seller be the one responsible for getting rid of the tenant, right? So showing you that form. Okay. Let's go back here. All right. So Seller has 7 days to give documents. So don't forget the seller has to make disclosures. So when you have an accepted offer, the seller now has 7 days to give all their disclosures. That's by default, 7 days. This is an interesting one. The buyer and the seller both have 5 days to sign escrow instructions. So what happens? Escrow opens and they send escrow instructions to the buyer and the seller. Technically, the buyer and the seller are supposed to sign those and give them back in 5 days. What usually happens is nobody signs these until right before closing. That's what usually happens. But if you're looking to pressure another party to get out of a contract, this is something that you could technically give a notice to perform for, that they have to sign this. So it could be a loophole to your, to your use and advantage if you want to try to get out of a contract. I don't want anyone to get out of a contract. I want all your contracts to go through, but sometimes you need to get out of a contract. So that is something that has to get done. Both buyer and seller need to sign escrow instructions within 5 days. Time to pay fees for ordering HOA documents. This is saying that the seller has 3 days to pay for or the person who agrees to pay for HOA docs has to do it within 3 days. Why? Because HOA docs take time to get. It takes time. So we want to make sure this is ordered right away. But or we're not waiting for HOA. All right. This is an interesting one. Whoever has agreed to install the smoke alarms and carbon monoxide and water heater bracing, it's usually the seller is paying for this, has to do it within 7 days. Now, this did not used to be part of the contract. We, as listing agents, we have the responsibility, I think, if the seller is agreeing to pay for this, we have the responsibility to, well, first of all, this is a government requirement. So someone has to pay for it. There have to be smoke alarms. There have to be carbon monoxide alarms, detectors. The water heaters have to have strapping so they don't fall over in an earthquake. Problem with a big heavy water heater, if it falls over in an earthquake, the gas line could break and it could be an explosion. So that's why we strap our water heaters. We have earthquakes here. Toilets have to be low flow in some areas, 1.6 gallon or even 1.2 gallon flush. And some areas like Los Angeles will require an emergency earthquake gas shut-off valve. So where the gas meter is, they'll install a box that shuts off the gas if there's seismic activity. This is saying that the seller is at a minimum agreeing, or someone is agreeing, in 7 days, whoever's paying for it, to get the smoke alarms and carbon monoxide installed and the water heater bracing. So just know, I used to not do this part until right before closing. So as a listing agent, if my seller's paying for this, I want to make sure that the buyer's buying. So I usually wouldn't have ordered the retrofitting inspection until the buyer removes contingencies. Once the buyer removes contingencies, I'll have the retrofitting inspector come to the property and they'll bill escrow. So the seller doesn't have to pay for this out of pocket. The retrofitting company will normally bill escrow and get paid at closing. But now this new contract says this is going to be done within 7 days. So if the seller is going to pay for this, this is an interesting one because
Isn't this stuff normally, don't people normally have this dealt with like all the time, like well before they're selling a house?
No.
People just don't.
Like say you walk into a property built in the 30s, someone just moved out. There's no smoke alarms, there's no carbon monoxide, and you're selling the property. You could recommend to the seller to
Before.
do it. You could, but maybe it's not their top priority, and
Yeah,
it'll happen before close of escrow, right?
yeah.
So you just wait. But once you enter a contract, you should do it within 7 days. Now, one thing that's really important, this carbon monoxide detector, the appraiser has to take a picture of it. I think that's a requirement that for the appraisal. So the appraiser is going to want to take a picture of that carbon monoxide detector. There are agents who used to carry these in their truck, the ones that plug in the wall. Yeah, and they would
Nice.
for the appraisal, they would plug it in, have the picture, and then they'd put it back in their car. So just throwing it out there.
JJ,
Okay. Yes.
okay, if it's a lease, do you do for all the lease?
For now, the issue with smoke alarms is I don't have a retrofitting company come for lease. But there is a disclosure that the tenant and the landlord sign that there are smoke alarms and carbon monoxide alarms. So
Yes.
the landlord's responsible. I don't want to see a situation where,
Yeah,
oh, wait, here's a situation that I'm glad you're asking about it, because here's the situation. The buyer is a developer who's going to tear down the house and they don't care about retrofitting. They don't care about smoke alarms, carbon monoxide. They're tearing down the house and they're willing to waive it. Okay, here's the problem. It's a government requirement. You can't waive it, but everyone does agree, and escrow may even go along with it. Okay. The problem is, let's say that developer, while they're waiting for their permits to be approved by the city, decides to rent the property for a month or two, or Airbnb it. And God forbid, a fire breaks out, someone dies. And it turns out that there was no smoke alarm. The seller is now on the hook for that, the seller. Right, so that's,
just reduce liability. I mean,
Yes,
I
yes.
recommend it for my lease clients. They still do it before the tenants move in. just-
okay, so going one step even beyond that, have a retrofitting company come out and when the
Check
retrofitting company comes out, they have to give a certificate of compliance. Now they're responsible. Right, so I would prefer to have a third-party company come and give a certificate. They're now responsible. It takes all the responsibility off the seller. So our custom practice here in LA is that the listing agent will have a retrofitting company come and do this inspection and give a certificate of compliance. So that's our custom here. I know
For the lease, right?
there are other areas like in Torrance where the listing agent does not call a retrofitting company. And the buyer, as part of their request for repairs, puts in there asking the seller to do retrofitting. So to pay for it. Yeah, it's
The lease, you have to do the same for the tenant, you have to, or not?
it's a landlord responsibility to have working smoke alarms, carbon monoxide, yes.
Yeah, can't remember, but the other guy,
But it's a landlord responsibility, like that.
yeah,
Landlord.
yeah.
Building, they go off all the time.
They do.
There's too many of them sensitive, but we still have them.
Yeah.
It's evidence of representative authority. So sometimes the offer is going to come from an LLC or a trust. We need to know that the person who's authorized to sign on behalf of the LLC or the trust is the actual signer. As soon as you open escrow, escrow is going to request a copy of the trust document or the LLC document with representative authority. So don't worry, escrow is going to ask for this. Title has to clear it. So, okay. What are we asking for on the next page here? Items included. Check everything. What's included? The stove, the refrigerator. If the property has a wine refrigerator, check it. Does it have a washer and dryer, dishwasher, microwave? I'm gonna ask for everything.
But if the property doesn't have this, so it
If it
doesn't.
doesn't have it, if it doesn't have it, don't check it. Yeah. So I'm usually going into the pictures in the MLS and looking to see if it has these things. Or in the description. Sometimes you want to ask for this potted trees and shrubs. And you know, sometimes there are pots around a property that have plants that are growing on the walls and you don't want them to remove them. So you're gonna ask for, it might be the whole charm of the property. Electric car charging system. You can ask for it if it's attached. Above ground pool and spa. An above ground spa is personal property. Right? So you walk into the backyard and there's this giant above ground spa. You have to ask for it separately in your purchase agreement because it's personal property. They can take it with them. Sometimes you go into this gorgeous backyard and there's this picturesque white gazebo and you picture like having a wedding there for your kids and grandkids. That's personal property. It's not attached. It's sitting on top. So make sure you ask for that gazebo here. Now, anything that's advertised in the MLS as included or excluded on the MLS doesn't matter. Only the contract matters. Why? Because the seller, in the listing, in the MLS listing, it said dining room chandelier is excluded. You have an email from the other agent that says the dining room chandelier is excluded. It was an heirloom. The seller is taking that with them. And no one mentions the dining room chandelier in the contract. The dining room chandelier is now coming with that property. The listing agent's in big trouble. Because they should have countered it out on a counter offer saying dining room chandelier is excluded.
Oh, not in the main, it doesn't go back to
The buyer is saying, yeah, I know that it said in the MLS that it was excluded. I know that there were emails back and forth,
Right.
but I wrote my offer and my offer price included that chandelier. And if the seller wanted it, they should have excluded it on a counter offer.
Oh.
The judge is only gonna look at the contract. They don't care about anything else. They just want to see
Then he's gonna,
what was agreed to between the buyer and the seller in writing, signed. That's all the judge wants to see.
seller is gonna be mad at
But
it.
just exactly, when you go on a listing agreement and your seller is telling you that's excluded, you better write it in bold on the outside of your folder. Don't forget
Don't forget this, I'm
Right.
saying 2 times.
on the counter. Yeah, don't forget.
I'll tell him that.
They're gonna be deep. All right. Natural hazard zone disclosure report. I'm gonna check here, if I'm writing an offer, I'm gonna check here that the seller is gonna pay for this. Maybe even an environmental, and I'm gonna check provided by my NHD. So my NHD is a Crest affiliated, our E&O insurance with our brokerages through Crest. Don't forget, our sellers get an automatic $25,000 insurance policy for free. If we use my NHD, it goes up to 50,000.
So if there's a lawsuit, everything, LSG is responsible for it.
If there's a loss.
Because they said the mother do something wrong or.
No, so we give a seller by using us as the listing agent. If they use Keller Williams Beverly Hills as their listing agent, our E&O insurance automatically gives the seller a free policy of $25,000 coverage. If they get sued by the buyer,
Right.
they have $25,000 coverage. There's a $2,500 deductible for them,
Right,
but they have 25,000 in coverage.
that's one.
And if we use a my NHD report, they have 50,000 in coverage.
Oh, my issue.
Yeah. So there's different ways for them to get 50,000 in coverage for free. They can get my NHD, or we can buy a home warranty for the buyer from either Fidelity, First American, or Public,
This additional then?
as long as it's Crest. So we have the brochures over here.
Then it's more than 50,000?
Then it's 50,000. That's the
50,000, not like so.
yeah, and that's a free 6-month policy. They can extend it for $200 for a year if they want to.
Oh,
It's up to them, but they get free 6 months. All right, so here's where we're gonna get into an additional report. We need to know here if the property is in a fire zone. I asked everyone to download something called the My NHD app. Does everyone remember that?
yeah.
So if you go into a web browser and you click on app, if you go into Chrome or Safari and you go to app.mynhd.com. It's gonna take you to an app that you can download and install on your phone. I'll just show you real quick in a browser. Everyone should do this. In a browser on your phone, go to app.mynhd.com. You're gonna come to this screen and you're gonna sign up. What this will look like. Log in here. Let me see. Anyways, this will allow you to check if you are in a fire zone or flood. Why is that important? If I'm in a fire zone, I'm going to select Fortress Wildfire Disclosure and have the seller pay for it. And I'll click here by my NHD again. So we can talk more about this, but if you're writing an offer in a fire zone, this is how you'll fill it out. If you're writing an offer on a condo or not in a fire zone, you can just select not applicable. And then NA.
And condo be in the fire zone also?
You're not gonna ask, I don't,
I mean,
I haven't, I mean,
like in the Vietnam,
it won't have, the building will have to deal.
the building will have.
The building will have to deal with the issues with the fire around it, not the individual condo owner. Yeah.
Thank you.
But if you're buying a duplex or triplex or fourplex, that's different.
Yeah.
If you're, because then you will have to deal with it. But if you're a condo, the building will do it.
You know,
All right. Here's an interesting one. You can ask, there is a city report that usually the seller will pay for, the 9A report. You could put 9A report here, select seller. Or just type city report is another way to do it. City report, it's, it already says report. Another sneaky thing you can do here, if you want to, be really sneaky, you can put a termite clearance. So that's a sneaky way of getting the seller to agree upfront to pay for termite work.
Oh. But if we have.
Because you're not asking for a termite report, you're asking for a termite clearance report. The only way to get the clearance report is for the termite company to have completed their termite work.
Hmm.
So it's just a sneaky way of asking for it upfront. It might get countered out, it might not. So I would say, if you're not competing with any other buyers, there's no harm in trying, right? If you're competing with other buyers, you know, you might not want to.
JJ,
Yeah.
do you ask for it if it's a condo?
If it's a condo, so when I'm looking at the property, I'm looking on the windowsills to see if I can see any droppings on the windowsills. So usually when you walk around a property, if you go to the windowsill, you can see little black pellets or little brown pellets, very, very small. You'll see a bunch of them. If you see that, there's termites. So it's up to you if you want to ask for it on a condo. I think you should always have a termite inspection. But I think our termite guy doesn't charge for them. So we use My Choice Exterminator. I don't think he charges for termite reports. He might charge $99, maybe. I don't know. I think he has to deal with our office where he doesn't charge. All right, smoke alarms. Here's where we are saying who is paying for it. So smoke alarms, carbon monoxide, water heater bracing, seller. Government required point of sale inspections reports. This is the 9A report. This is a government required point of sale inspection, so that's the 9A. Government required point of sale corrective, yeah.
As far as 9A report, anything we need to pay attention to, any?
So I used to quickly answer that question. It's funny because when I asked Pele at escrow, is there anything I should be concerned about on the 9A report? She will not answer that question. So then I started saying to myself, why isn't she answering this question? I've seen a lot of 9A reports. What usually appears on the report is if the property is hooked up to a sewer. Okay. Sometimes you're going to get a certificate of occupancy attached to it. What also appears on there are any codes that the property falls under. So you'll see, you know, that there's subject to this code and this code and this code. So you might want to look up those codes if you're extreme, like you could if you want to do extra. We're not required to. We're just required to give that report to our buyer. So there are things that could potentially pop up on the 9A that you were not expecting, like maybe some brush clearance fines that are against the property. Like there's certain things that could pop up on it. I would say when you get the 9A, just look on it and see if anything weird is saying on it. Like,
and the 9A report is under the inspection contingency. If this is like,
correct.
we only have 5 days for inspection, and then 9A report gave us like in the date 8.
So I would say even if you remove all of your contingencies and the 9A report comes, that's a new disclosure that could open up a 5-day window of approval.
Got it.
Now, if you want to be safe, when you're removing all of your contingencies, if the 9A report hasn't come back yet, you can say you're removing all contingencies except approval of the 9A report. Right, because the seller does have the responsibility to give it to you. It is a requirement if you check this box here. Right, seller, government required point of sale report. So here the seller is agreeing to give it to you, right? Okay, government required point of sale corrective remedial actions. Check seller. What would be the difference between this one and Q4? So Q4 is specifically asking for smoke alarms, carbon monoxide, and water heater bracing. This one is saying low flow toilets, emergency earthquake gas shut-off valve. Sometimes in a pool, you know, I don't know. It might be required to put in a second drain device. So I don't know. I'm in that kind of situation right now. I hope they don't call it out. We'll see what happens.
I think this is only Los Angeles, right? Not
Yeah,
San
Los
Bernardino,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
Orange County.
So yeah, different areas have different requirements.
Hey, JJ, I'm sorry, you showed termite clearance. What was it? I mean,
Termite clearance.
what does it, oh,
So if a termite report,
But
it lists what the damage is and what the recommendations are and a price to fix it all.
so you have to put that in there always.
Well, if you write in here clearance report, the only way that the seller can provide that particular clearance report is to do the work.
Oh,
Right, a clearance report is what the termite company gives after they've finished their work.
so if there's some damage in that one,
This is a very sneaky way of getting the seller to agree to do the termite work upfront.
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 If he doesn't know,
He doesn't, right, exactly. It's sneaky. I'm telling you, it's sneaky. If you are competing with other buyers, don't do this.
oh, don't do that. Yeah.
All right, escrow fee. Okay, there's different ways that agents fill this out, escrow fee. We do want escrow to be Cannon Hills closings. That's our Cannon Hills closings. Lake Heath. That's our escrow company. I'm not gonna check her. So there used to be only you would check both buyer and seller. Can't do that anymore. Both. Each to pay their own fees. A lot of listing agents will do it this way. A lot of agents will do it this way, each to pay their own fees. I don't like to do it this way because it means that the charges can be different for both buyer and
Yeah,
seller.
that's right.
So I like to check both, and I'll put in here to pay same low.
Which rate same low, so
To pay this.
I mean, seller is more, they have to pay more than buyer. I mean, this is what was,
So when I'm writing my offer,
right,
the seller might counter me with their own escrow company.
right.
I want to make sure if they're countering me with their escrow company and they're insisting it's their escrow company,
Their escrow
that
company.
I'm paying the same rate, my buyer is paying the same rate as their seller. I don't want them playing games like
Oh, that's.
seller's getting free and my buyer's paying everything. Right?
Straight to seller.
So I want them both to pay the same low rate.
How can you find that? If
Can I enforce it? I really can't. You know why? Because escrow can say 2,000 to the buyer, 2,000 to the seller, except on the seller's accounting, it says 2,000 to the seller. And then they give a credit on this side for 2,000.
Hey,
So I can't.
can you say low buyer pay is low?
You can do whatever you want.
Buyer share.
This is how I do it.
Right, okay.
This is how I do it. This is escrow fees, part of a closing cost. A closing cost to a buyer is going to be escrow fees, lender fees, and anything that they need to reimburse for a buyer. So if a seller has prepaid property taxes or prepaid HOA fee, that needs to get reimbursed by the buyer.
Yeah.
The seller's closing costs are going to be commissions, right? Transfer taxes.
What about the insurance? They parade insurance also? If there's
If the seller has prepaid, there are
insurance, yeah, insurance, yeah.
no insurance, because insurance will be refunded by the insurance company.
Oh, by insurance company, okay.
Right,
If someone's paying their mortgage early, that would be,
yeah, that'll get refunded.
so whatever they're paying, the extra that they've added on to whatever payment when okay.
Yeah, escrow's gonna figure out all the prorations.
Right.
Is closing cost.
Okay, so when you're talking about a point is usually in reference to loan. And if the buyer is paying 1 point, That is a closing cost, but it's 1% of the loan amount. So if they're borrowing 800,000 and they're being charged a point, they're paying $8,000 for that loan
As part of their closing.
as part of their closing. Yeah. So a point is up, 1 point is 1%. So if it's an $800,000 loan, it's an 1 point is $8,000. So they're paying 2 points, paying $60,000. Yeah. All right. Owner's title insurance policy. We're gonna ask that the seller pay for the owner's title insurance policy. Who's the escrow company? So we can put, Clearmark Title, put, First American, Fidelity, right? We'll put our title company and the title officer. So that's gonna be, Clearmark.
Or if the seller choose another company which is higher than what you have to pay.
Clearmark Title, Jerry Harris. Okay.
It'd only be,
So we're asking the seller to pay for the owner's title policy. The seller will agree to something, maybe their own company. Now, let's just say your buyer is insisting on their title company. Right? The seller doesn't have to pay for that. The seller, if the seller agreed to pay for Clearmark, and let's just say that there's you wrote in your offer Clearmark, they responded back that they want, I don't know,
Okay.
lawyer's title, okay.
And you
And
have
the
to-
buyer is insisting on Clearmark. The seller doesn't have to agree. The seller can say, no, I'll pay for your policy for lawyers. And if you want Clearmark, you can pay for it.
Or he doesn't have to pay anything, or they have to pay the.
No, they're agreeing to whatever's in the offer.
I see.
But you can't, as the buyer, you can't just change escrow companies. And you can't, everything has to be mutually agreed.
But if you choose your own title company, do you have to pay for it as a buyer, or the seller still has to pay?
So this is negotiable. It's all negotiable. But it's customary in our market,
Just the seller.
seller will pay for your title policy. We're asking for our title policy. We're asking for our title company.
Right. The seller say
The
you.
seller can say, no, I want to use my title company.
Go pay for yourself,
Good, they could.
or you can negotiate something, get something.
Why? Okay. Now, it says here automatically buyer's lender title policy, buyer pays for that. So the seller will pay for the buyer's insurance policy. Let's just say the buyer is paying cash. Seller will pay for the buyer's title policy. Now, if the buyer on their own right is getting a loan, that has nothing to do with the seller, right? The seller is paying for a title policy for the buyer. If the buyer wants to get their own loan, the buyer is going to pay for the title policy for the lender.
Yeah,
That only has to do with the buyer, because the buyer is the one getting the loan, not the seller.
right.
So the seller will pay for the buyer's policy. The buyer will pay for the lender's policy. All right, county transfer taxes, city transfer taxes. I want the seller to pay for those.
Which one is the higher? Is it for one in
The
four?
higher is the city. The city's,
City is 4%, right?
city's high.
So it may continue, I don't pay city, you pay that.
Do you get counters where they won't pay?
Yeah.
Okay. Beverly Hills has no city transfer tax.
Oh, no, well, okay, I'm not worried.
So there's no city transfer tax in Beverly Hills.
everywhere else in LA.
There are places, but
Yeah,
but Beverly Hills for sure doesn't.
4.1%, I think, yeah.
Okay, HOA fees, the seller will pay for the HOA fee for preparing disclosures. HOA transfer fees, I want the seller to pay for those. Private transfer fees are automatically gonna be seller, that's fine. Home warranty, okay. Now we're gonna ask for the seller to buy a home warranty policy for our buyer. So we're gonna ask the seller to pay $615 or whatever, you're gonna look up what the policy costs. We want a Crest policy. So I'm gonna ask for a Crest policy for my buyer,
When you put not to exceed, let's say you have a 10.
not to exceed, yeah. So what is a home warranty? A home warranty, it's an insurance policy that the seller pays for, that if the buyer has a problem, they can call the home warranty company and they'll come and fix it. So the seller will pay for this policy, right? If the buyer has a leak, or the microwave breaks, or the oven breaks, the dishwasher breaks.
1 year.
The electrical outlet doesn't work, the air conditioning goes out, right? The garbage disposal goes out. all the buyer has to do in that first year or 13 months is call the home warranty company. They're gonna pay a $90 service call and the warranty company will fix it. Whatever, it is,
1 year,
for 13 months, yeah.
for 13 months.
And this is all is for not for if the house is as is or something. This is for
As long
the
as,
houses
it doesn't matter, if you have this policy, buyer can call the home warranty company and get it fixed.
It's on the new item that if it's,
Well, if it's a brand new item, it's gonna have a factory warranty. Right? So
If you don't put any amount in there, you can get that.
you have to have,
You have to call the company, get the price.
so I usually look at the
Get
brochure.
the thing ordered.
Yeah, I look at the brochure and I see what the amount is.
That's what.
Now, don't forget, you're gonna be adding money to this if the property has a pool,
Oh, yeah.
right? So you just need to look at the brochure, or you need to call the company and say, how much will this policy cost?
Food also.
They'll charge you more for over 5,000 square feet.
Yeah,
If it has an ADU, you wanna make sure the ADU is covered. If you're buying a duplex, triplex, fourplex, you wanna make sure everything is covered. So that number is gonna go up. It's also gonna go up if it's a saltwater pool versus a freshwater pool.
Yeah.
Right, so you just wanna make sure it has all the bells and whistles. All right, so other terms, close of escrow to be 30 days or less or by mutual agreement. There's one more term I'm gonna put in here. And that is that the seller agrees to initial paragraphs 29 and 31. Dated.
oh, yes. Wait, the buyer has to agree, then the seller has,
So the buyer is gonna initial those paragraphs right now.
right now.
The seller is gonna receive your offer and they don't have to initial them.
Oh.
The seller can actually accept the offer and not initial those paragraphs.
So,
And then you have an accepted offer and those two paragraphs do not apply.
oh,
So in California, you can have an accepted offer and parts of a contract that are only initialed by one party don't apply. It has to be initialed by both parties. So now, the reason I'm adding the sentences
that's important.
because how do I know if the seller is going to agree to those two paragraphs?
If not, you're responsible for the damage, you're gonna lose your,
I'm writing an offer with those two paragraphs initialed.
right, I said it
The
to.
seller can accept my offer and not initial those two paragraphs and then they don't apply. The only way I can guarantee that the seller is initialing them is to put this here.
What's the cost of it if he does, why doesn't want to sign it because it costs too much? Why doesn't he want to go to arbitration?
Let's talk.
Just one thing.
Okay, what are those two paragraphs? We're gonna skip down now.
Usually they sign it, I didn't know.
Let's get paragraphs 29 and 31. All right, there's one page on this contract that requires 3 different places for initialing.
Fine,
This page has this paragraph, and at the bottom of the page. There's 3 places for
fine,
initialing on this one page.
right.
Okay, let's talk about liquidated damages. By initialing in the space below, you are agreeing to liquidated damages. What is liquidated damages? So real quick, damages. It's very hard to come up with a number of damages in real estate. It's hard. Like real estate, numbers can be all over the place. How do we determine what damages are in real estate? Hard. So what usually happens is we'll agree to an amount upfront. If the buyer doesn't do the deal and they've removed all their contingencies and then they still don't do the deal,
They lose it,
they're agreeing to lose their deposit,
right,
right? Okay. What happens if you get an accepted offer for $1 million?
right,
Your buyer removes their contingencies. They back out. They can't do the deal, right? And this was not initial. Okay, now the seller now takes the property that they were just in escrow for $1 million, and they sell it to buyer number 2 for 800,000,
right,
because that's the only buyer that was ready to buy it.
right,
The seller can now claim damages of 200,000. They were in escrow with your buyer for $1 million.
right,
Your
right.
buyer didn't perform.
Oh.
And now they sell it for 8. They have 200,000 in damages. So now they're gonna sue your buyer for 200,000. Had your buyer and seller both initialed this paragraph, They would have only been liable for their.
The 3%.
Correct. So this paragraph, what liquidated damages does is it limits a buyer's liability to their deposit,
So some,
not to exceed 3%.
wow.
So let's read the paragraph real quick. If the buyer fails to complete this purchase because of the buyer's default, the seller shall retain its liquidated damages to the deposit actually paid. Now, if you're a listing agent and you receive an offer from an investor that only has a $10,000 deposit, there's a lot of investors out there offering $10,000 deposit and not 3%. The most that buyer could ever lose is $10,000,
Right,
right? So, let's keep going, maybe. If the property is a dwelling with no more than 4 units, one of which buyer intends to occupy, then the amount retained shall be no more than 3% of the purchase price. Okay, so liquidated damages means the deposit actually paid.
right,
Okay, so if there's only 10,000 in escrow, that's all they're getting.
right.
All right. Now, let's say that there is 5% in escrow, or the buyer put all their money. Let's say the buyer put all their money into escrow to close,
Right,
and then the lender at the last second can't do the loan.
Right.
Now the buyer has all their 20% in escrow,
right,
and the lender can't put their 80% in.
right,
The buyer now has 20% in escrow.
right,
Okay, this is saying if the property is a dwelling with no more than 4 units, so it's a house or a condo, one of which the buyer intends to occupy, so the buyer is going to move in as their primary.
It's a 2.4.
Then the amount retained shall be no more than 3% of the purchase price. So they're going to get 17% back,
Right.
right?
Oh, it's, right.
Any excess shall be returned to buyer. Release of funds will require mutual signed release instructions. So anything that escrow does always has to be signed by both the buyer and the seller. Escrow can't take unilateral instructions. It has to be agreed by buyer and seller in writing. So that's what this is saying. Release of funds will require mutual signed release instructions, both buyer and seller. If you're going to put an increased deposit, there's going to be a new liquidated damages clause. So just remember that. Okay. Then the other paragraph that requires initials is arbitration. What is arbitration? If there's a dispute between the buyer and the seller, there's going to be mediation. Mediation is trying to work it out, but it's not binding. Okay. Arbitration is binding. It's just like going to court. The judge makes a ruling, it's binding.
Right.
The difference is arbitration is much faster. So if you go to court and you get a court date, that could be 2 years from now. Arbitration, you can literally schedule next week. Right? If you
But
find
mediation,
mediation, same thing, quick.
so,
But mediation's not binding.
so what does it mean?
It's arbitration. Why would I want arbitration? If I'm a seller, I want arbitration
Yes,
pretty much because I don't want my property being tied up in a court for 2 years. And I can't sell my property, that money, I can't do anything with the property, it's tied up in court. I want a quick resolution. Now, I once had an attorney client who said, I don't want to initial arbitration because I can always agree to it in the future. Right? We can always agree to arbitration in the future. I went back to my office manager and I said, my client doesn't want to initial arbitration. What do I do? She said, tell your client that the other party doesn't have to agree to it in the future. Like he may want to agree to it in the future because he thinks he's in the right. But if the other party doesn't agree to it, they don't have to. So initial it now and just agree to it now. Right? So he did.
can he contact the seller, contact, I'm not gonna agree to arbitration?
So again, we're just writing our offer right now.
Right, right,
Right? So in our offer, we are saying that the seller agrees to initial those 2 paragraphs.
right,
Right? So because technically we could send our offer and the seller doesn't initial them and then we don't have those initials. So that's why I suggest you do this in your offers. All right. Now, I think that's it for today. Yeah, I think that's it for today. We're gonna continue this. What's today? Today's Thursday? We're gonna continue, yeah. Well, Monday we have Ignite, so, but I think what's gonna happen is we're gonna push this one till one by 1 day. So I think we'll do this one on next Thursday. But you guys have gone through the meat and potatoes of the purchase agreement. The rest really is all the language. But everything that needs to be filled out, we pretty much did. The only other thing that needs to be filled out, which we'll talk about, is this paragraph applies to certain things like if the property has a tenant, if the property is on a septic tank, if it's a backup offer, if it's in a trust or an REO or a short sale or a probate. So those are very specific items that you'll have to just go through and see if it applies to your property. It's the only other
Question,
thing.
JJ.
Yeah,
What page are we stopping?
we're stopping,
The
we're
first-
stopping,
Okay.
Last page.
sorry, Susie. We're stopping at the page 4 of 16.
Okay, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah,
The first page of the RPA, you mentioned that we should add the interest rates and the points, but
Yes.
sometimes the lenders don't have it locked until a few days before closing.
okay,
How
so
do we?
so there
deal with
needs to
that?
be, there needs to be something here that the buyer is agreeing to be bound by, because here's the situation. If you don't put anything in here, the buyer really can't back out on their loan.
Yeah.
They can't use the loan as an excuse to back out.
Oh, so the loan contingency doesn't apply anymore if we don't
Not
put the
real,
interest
not really,
rate? No.
not really, because that buyer can go
Oh.
get a, that buyer can go get a 20% loan,
Right, right.
Oh, wow,
Right.
okay.
can't they? I'll make a 20% loan. And I'll go borrow 15% and charge them 20.
Yeah,
Right? I'll go to my friend and say, hey, can I borrow money?
And then you the money.
15%, and I'll lend it to your buyer for 20.
Okay. It says not to exceed 7.5%, but it can always change before closing, right?
If you're going to use this to back out, as a contingency, there should be a letter from the lender saying, I cannot do the loan that's on page 1 of the purchase agreement. And
Got it.
that is sufficient for the buyer to back out and not lose their deposit. If you don't have a rate here, the letter, you can get a letter from the lender saying, I can't make the loan at any rate because of such, I don't know. So if my buyer is going to back out on a property, I would much prefer to use my investigation contingency for anything. So, but if there is a number here, then the lender could easily write a letter saying we can't make this loan at that rate and fine. That's legit. It just protects your buyer.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, have a great day, guys.
Thank you, thank you.
Great day. We'll pick it up next week.
JJ, I really have to congratulate this lawyer who drew this contract. It's everything in there. I can't imagine.
So when I started real estate, this was an 8-page contract.
Right.
Now it's a 16-page contract.
I mean,
But I was hearing from agents, they remember when it was a 1-page contract, right? So
yeah.
it's gonna get bigger and bigger and bigger.
I just met a guy door knocking who works at Sotheby's talking about how he's confused by all of it. He's been doing real estate for a lot of years.
What from you confusion?
And he's like, I think we all need to work together because I'm concerned.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot.
It's like, sure, if you want
Like,
to
it's-
do business.
The first time I wrote an offer, it took me all day. And it was an 8-page contract. Yeah, all of it. Second time it took me half a day because I was more familiar with it. Third time it took me a full day again because I hadn't written an offer. I mean, now I can get through it pretty quickly because I'm familiar with it, but
Took me all day
there's a lot of,
to go through my own
Yeah.
contract.
there's a lot of terms,
Department, like
a lot of terms.
too much stuff.
Yeah.
And just like.
Yeah, it's just. Yeah, it's.
What's in there?
Yeah, I know, I'm sorry, that's all I had was.
Good job.
Like.
Thank you.
I used to